Hi. Can you guys hear me? Okay, great. Awesome. We're going to get started. So hi, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm Evangeline McDermott. I'm head of publisher account management at Taboola. And we have a very, very impressive group of women here. And I have to read off this paper because there's just so many accomplishments and so much hard work that they're doing. So I'm going to start with actually Ronnie. Hi, Ronnie. So Ronnie Dickerson Stewart is an award-winning executive leadership development expert and the founder of Oh Hey Coach, a leadership development, career design, and learning company. She is also the creator and host of the Career Clinic podcast. Ronnie has spent nearly the last 2 decades as a sought-out leader serving across the advertising, media, and tech industries in companies like Starcom, Burrell, Digitas, Publicis, and Zoom. Ronnie also serves as a foundation board member of She Runs It. Welcome, Ronnie. Thank you for being here. Lynda. Hi, Lynda. Lynda Clarizio is the co-founder and general partner of the 98. The 98 is an early-stage venture fund investing in technology businesses led by women. She is regularly recognized as one of the most influential and visionary leaders in digital media. Lynda served as president of Nielsen's U.S. media business and president of AOL's global advertising business. Lynda has been recognized as one of Crain's 50 most powerful women in New York, the Washingtonian's top 40 lawyers under 40, and she's currently serving on our board at Taboola. So thank you for being here, Lynda. Meg. Hi, Meg. Meg is currently the Senior Director of Partnerships and Programming at the Female Quotient, the largest community of women in business. Meg has spent her career devoted to women's empowerment, storytelling, and forging partnerships that uplift women leaders. Previously, she ran the partnerships team at iFund Women, a funding platform for women-owned businesses, and worked in live journalism and on the gender initiative at the New York Times. Thank you, Meg, for being here. And last but not least, Rebecca. Rebecca Deng is the commercial advisor to the CRO at Triple Lift. In her role, she acts as a thought partner to the CRO, revenue leadership team, and executive leadership team, and cross-functional teams on revenue-generating strategies, company policies, and operating systems. Rebecca is also the U.S. principal board member for the Women in Programmatic Network. Since 2020, the network provides networking events and speaking opportunities, leads industry initiatives, discusses the latest and greatest in the industry, and pushes to eradicate the gender pay gap. Thank you for being here, Rebecca. All right, so we got all of the accolades and accomplishments out of the way, and so we have just really, this is an informal conversation between women, and I want to really dive into mentorship and networking because that is always a topic when it comes to development, professional development for women, personal development. But what does it mean to have a mentorship or to be part of a mentorship, whether it's becoming a mentor yourself or being a mentee? And how do you view the role of that versus just a general networking opportunity? Because I think we can kind of mix the two a little bit. And also, I've seen myself really successful mentorships, but on the other hand, just kind of failed mentorships. So I'd love to discuss that topic to kick us off. So who wants to jump in first?
We look down the aisle. Okay. I'll start and then we'll pass the popcorn. But I will say thank you to the Taboola team for pulling together such an intimate and thoughtful space for us to have these types of conversations in a very direct and transparent way. So thank you. I like to categorize mentorship and being a mentee as one of the most critical things I've ever done in my career, and one of the most humbling things. I'll also offer the observation that the word mentor and mentorship is thrown around quite casually in some respects when we think about it from a career standpoint. These days, I think sometimes people think about it as I have a mentor, check the box. You know, it's like getting an infinity stone and acquiring something that has some maybe subjective level of purpose or currency. But when I think about mentorship, I think about it as one of those critical things that usually helps you make big stair-step leaps at different critical points of your career. Especially as women, when we all work in industries and spaces that are frankly quite incestuous in terms of who knows who's connected, and where power sits. For me, mentorship has been the thing that has neutralized some of those, let's call it, less than ideal situations where I might not have had power. And that mentorship has been in the sense of individuals offering me clarity about the way forward. And then some of those mentorship relationships evolved into something else, called sponsorship, where people are putting their currency on the line for me. But it's just one of those necessary currents that has sat with me across my career. And I'm hoping right now we're having a renaissance of actually finding the truth and the value of mentorship versus it being one of these casual things that we check the box on. Yeah.
I'll jump in. I loved that, and I was earlier in my career a serial mentee. I felt very stressed about finding mentors, and thought, I need to have mentors in my life. That's how I'm going to get a promotion. That's how I'm going to get somewhere. And I think I went about it in the wrong way. And I think for me, I think about mentorship and networking, and it feels very transactional. Like it feels like I'll give you something and you give me something back. And instead, I work at the Female Quotient. We are all about building community. And if you think about it more like building community, I think that's a healthier way, because it loses kind of that slimy feeling of, tit for tat, I would say. So, and I do have wonderful mentors in my life who have supported me and gotten me to the next level. But building community, I think, is just a nicer, healthier way to look at it.
And if I could just... Son?
Yes.
Yeah, if I could just follow up on that. I mean, I think you need both mentors and networking relationships, to advance in your career. I have had amazing mentors in my career, both men and women. My first mentor was my first boss right out of Harvard Law School. Where's Blythe? She's also from Harvard Law School. And this is, I've been around, ladies. This was in 1985. I went to work as a lawyer at the State Department. There were no women there, but I was assigned to work for the one female lawyer. The first thing she did was bring me into a room and close the door and say, I just want you to know there's a safe space here, and every time you feel like crying, come in here and cry to me, and don't ever let the men see you cry, because they're going to totally freak out and it's going to hurt your career. So that was 40 years ago, and she became an incredible mentor to me, and still I talk to her about times in my career. And so a lot of your mentoring relationships really come from the deep working relationships that you have with people. Mentorship is a deep relationship. It's not transactional, as you point out. It's a deep relationship that comes from people that you've worked with, people that you've interacted with, and that's going to be something that you're going to develop across your career. And I encourage you all to do that and not be shy about doing that. Networking is also important. I think you should network the hell out of your career. It's hard to do when you're younger and you have families and you have commitments. I found it really hard to do a lot of networking when I had 2 young kids, but it is important to have that sort of periphery of relationships. So I just want to agree with all that you're all saying. You need both sets of relationships, and if there's certainly ways we can help as you're going about it, we're happy to do it.
Yeah, I just wanted to share, I'm on the Harvard Business Review Advisory Council, and I read a lot of articles before they come out and help pick the cover of the Harvard Business Review. And one article that came out recently that's really interesting was about how women are penalized for networking with high status individuals. And really interesting in terms of what you said, that the way that that's neutralized is by women focusing on building community. Mm-hmm. So for whatever reason, women become less threatening over time to people when their focus, when they network, is about building community. So maybe that's building your internal ERG, building a network outside as you building like networks with net new people, or creating your own space. But that is one thing that has been proven to be helpful to neutralize some of that pushback that you might get, to really focus on building a community.
So you all touched on a few really important points. The networking and mentorship being both important but different, and the community aspect of it. So any advice for the women in the room? I mean, there's women that are leaders themselves, there are women that are individual contributors in the room, but to create that community as a leader or as an individual contributor, how can you do that? And also, what are some of the challenges that women face? I mean, you touched on some of them, but in terms of if you don't have a direct manager that is supportive of that, or can be your mentor and you have to look elsewhere, how do you navigate that challenge?
I think there's some things you can do as a leader, and we talked about it in the prep. I mean, you were talking about office hours, having office hours where you're very open and let people come in and talk to you about things that are of concern to them. That's one way to address it. I've also had a lot of success forming small mentorship groups. So when I was actually at Nielsen, we created these small mentorship groups where people, instead of having one mentor, they had small groups. It's a little bit like what Chief does, but doing it within your own company. And so that wasn't necessarily people that you had worked with. It was people that you worked with, but also people within your organization. And that actually seemed to work pretty well. So you can sort of mirror what like a chief does in your own organization. But it's to create that community. I mean, you really had the right word, to create that community and make people feel like they have people they can talk to and go to as you're dealing with the inevitable challenges you're going to have in your career. I mean, it's not all great, right? There's ups and there's downs, and having those mentors that you can talk to makes all the difference.
I think there's everything that you're saying also lends itself into this idea of like really understanding how power moves in your respective industry. In our respective industry, and then understanding how decisions are made and understanding the value of that community and co-conspirators. I love to use that word.
Sounds sort of evil.
Right. We're hatching plans. The ladies are working on things. Now there's punitive measures to stop us. We're penalized for it. So, truth. I think understanding that having co-conspirators, like as the wind in your sails across your career, is so necessary. I think there's a point in all of our careers where maybe we're more competitive and we're trying to make a name for ourselves, and so maybe the person across to us or next to us, we aren't as vulnerable as we could be. And then in that lack of vulnerability, we're mutually diminishing our currency versus if we were to be conspire together. I do think there's a tipping point in our respective careers as a leader where you can pick up the phone and call any number of people to get something done. That's where you hope to get. That's where the power sits. And so we think about networking transactionally. There is a point where it feels transactional because you're trying to figure out your approach and how you do it. But when you said, I need some co-conspirators in this thing, that networking starts to become more intentional, and that network starts to become powerful. So my hope is, like, even for folks who've been 2-3 decades in your career, there's still the opportunity to reinvest in that network. But if you're on the rise and figuring things out, I think thinking about who would be my co-conspirators right now and investing in those relationships in a vulnerable way, I think that's to the point of how you build that community.
I love that word, co-conspirator. That's great. What are some other challenges that women face, or women of color in particular, in finding that mentorship or finding that network?
Yeah, I would say that when I think about the trajectory of my career and what I want to focus on, think about it in terms of pie. So performance, influence, and then exposure. And I think women perform really well and think that will just do everything for them. So it's not just performing well, it's thinking about how can I maybe influence decisions, influence the projects that I want, but then also focusing on your exposure. So that's not just internal, and I think sometimes women can play it small in terms of their workplace. It's what's your larger industry level of exposure. Being a member of the Women in Programmatic Network has been really amazing for that, because it's not just about building something smaller scale, it's building something industry-wide. And I mean, I think that it is important to build communities within our organizations and within our ERGs. But there's also an element of like, if you would like to conspire with people long term, if you build something right outside of your organization, you can take it with you. It's part of your personal brand long term. So I would say thinking about my brand and thinking about what I can do industry-wide is kind of my segue to get around maybe not having that stronger one-on-one mentorship.
Yeah, that's really smart. So let's lean into the manager role a little bit, and also responsibility of a company. How should companies and managers be thinking about creating that allyship, creating equal opportunity for women, regardless of gender or race? What role do companies play in all of this?
Can I actually go back to the prior question for a second?
Course.
I just want to add on more to what you were saying. I think look, it's not easy being a woman in the workplace. I mean, especially not being a woman of color. I mean, you just sort of have to acknowledge that. And, I often say you're not really taught this in school. You're in school and you're told if you get 100 on your math test, that's good. You move to sort of math 101 to math 201, and then you go into the workplace and things are different. And I do think you need to sort of understand that to be successful, because we want you all to be successful, and there are not enough successful women out there. I was actually just looking at the data. Fortune 500 companies, still less than 10% of women are CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, and let's not even talk about women of color. I'm sure maybe there's one. So we still have a long way to go. And I have done so many things wrong in my career, and I'd be happy to share that. But I want you to learn from it, and don't do some of the things that I did. I always tried to be the smartest girl in the room, and what I found over time that wasn't effective. That when you were sitting in a room and you might be the only woman there or the only person of color, no matter how smart you were, if you didn't build the trusted relationships, you would just be dismissed as the crazy smart person in the room. And I don't think it's as much of an issue for men, but you have to use this to your advantage. And you can do things like build the relationship of trust. You were talking about trust. It's harder to do when you're not one of them, but you can do it. It is something that's possible to do. And if you have mentors and a community that supports you when you're scared, and I have to say, I've been terrified at many, many times in my career. You can get over that and build those relationships and not be afraid to speak up. I mean, you were talking about women sometimes are trying too much to be perfect and not so much to be, if you feel there's an issue that you can solve, if you feel there's something you're concerned about, speak up. Don't be shy about speaking up. But if you haven't built the trust and you haven't built those relationships, you might not get a receptive audience. So first, build the relationships, and second, don't be afraid to speak up. Even if you don't know 100% of the answer, I can't tell you how many men have worked for me, and they've come to me, and they've volunteered for things, and they
don't know what they're doing.
What the fuck? They don't know what the fuck they're talking about. And they're like, pick me, pick me. And I've had many women come to me and be much more thoughtful and smarter about approaching things. And often they don't get picked for the job. It sucks. It really sucks. But I think you can adopt some tactics in your career so that you can be successful, building the trust, not being afraid, building the mentorships, building the relationships. That's how you'll get ahead. Sorry.
Oh, that was amazing.
Eventually, I'd love to ask a question apropos of the mentorship conversation. I really think that, the women mentor-mentee relationship, as you mentioned, your very first one, safe space. I completely agree, which is why I feel it's really incumbent upon us to really embrace this in both ways. But the fact is that there's a lot of men in very powerful positions. And there is some challenge, and I want to know how you guys have addressed this yourselves, when you are trying to create a mentor-mentee relationship with a man in power, right? And there is, if you're spending a significant amount or like regular amount of time one-on-one, there's some commentary, and it's difficult to navigate sometimes, right? And navigate for them as well, because there's these social mores and expectations that are like legacy And how do we get beyond those to make it comfortable so that you can get, so that you can benefit from that relationship? I have direct examples in my life where I have a mentor who's been a great mentor to me, but not as good as he could have been, because it's much easier for him to spend that extra time with guys on the team and to say, go for lunch outside the office, go golf outside the office, and spend that extra time just talking about softer skills or just opportunities. And how do we break that perception?
How have you overcome it? Like, how have you overcome it?
I've overcome it in part by just choosing to ignore that, choosing to ignore any kind of commentary and doing my thing, which is probably similar to yours, Lynda, like trying to do A+. I'm going to be reliable and I'm going to deliver, and that's going to eventually prove that I'm, reliably going to be there, and it's not for a transactional reason or for personal gain. But I do think it is a bit tricky of a situation.
Yeah, I just started a new role in January, and I pitched being a commercial advisor to my CRO, and he started maybe 10 months ago. I worked with him for about 6 months and pitched that role. And I did what you did. I just completely ignored it. He's also European, which I think makes a difference, perhaps. This is a little different. But I will say that I thought about it in terms of pie, so like performance, influence, and then exposure. And when you perform really well, and not only that, you anticipate really well, and you start to build that trust, that's when you build the influence, and then you get the exposure. And then after 6 months of working with him, I was able to say, I work with you well, you should hire me to work with you exclusively in this way. And regardless of what the commentary is, like, I'm good. And it's obvious that that's why I was chosen for the role. So I agree with what you're saying, that there's an element of like, you just got to A+ it.
And I've diffused it also by including other people. Like sometimes including 1 or 2 other people if I wanted to have, kind of a productive talk about certain things, like including someone else to diffuse it so it wasn't one-on-one. I mean, I might have benefited more from the one-on-one, but I thought it kind of diffuses any sentiment around it in terms of like a power imbalance or that type of thing.
My only additive thought is to that, in like finding ways to diffuse the imbalance or the perception of it. My strategy has been about recognizing and being very clear on the value exchange up front. Yes, you can demonstrate that through your own efficacy and delivery of work, so someone could recognize you and say, that's a person I want to mentor. But if you're approaching a person for mentorship and that value exchange isn't obvious or the trust hasn't been established, it's stating up front, here's what I do, here's what you do, very clearly, this is the scope of what I'd like to explore in terms of learning from you, and having it fit in a very clear value exchange container. Like, that's been helpful for me, because I've noticed what you've noticed in some cases in terms of the depths of relationships, but not letting that remove me from having mentorship from a man has looked like, okay, what do I want to learn from this person? Isn't to absorb their general leadership essence. I want to learn a specific tactic and just really being clear on it. And that to me has opened the door, and it's been created language for them and me so that that relationship couldn't be questioned. It comes back to, this is our core value exchange and our remit, and maybe we build on that over time, but it starts with clarity.
I also find, just to complement that, I also find that while I'd like to think that it's just all about the professional, the fact is people want to help you if they like you.
Of course.
And they need to connect with you. So there has to be some kind of common ground there.
That's part of the trust.
I was going to say, I've never had a male mentor, I will admit. I don't know what that says about me. But I've been lucky to have a lot of incredible women who have just frankly modeled excellent leadership behavior. And I've worked at large companies. I've worked at small companies. I had a boss who was when I was at the New York Times, she was the most senior woman on the masthead. And when her and her colleagues at that level would have to convene, it was always at 5:30 p.m. or after, when the newsroom was like kind of not sizzling as much as it is during the day. And she always made a point to talk about the fact that this time was inconvenient for her, and to talk about what her children were doing and who was taking care of her children and all of that. And I thought it was so incredible. And she was so open about it. And it was just like, and she was one of the people who worked with the employee resource group that supported women, who advocated for changing our maternity leave policy, who advocated for a flexible work policy. This was pre-pandemic. So to your question earlier, like, how are managers accountable for creating that allyship? I think an example like that is a good one. I had another boss who used to put in a request for the highest budget in terms of internal funding, because she would spend it on goodbye parties for her team, welcome parties, baby showers, celebrations, and she wanted to set a good example that, like, the people on my team are the most important thing to me, so that's where I'm going to put my dollars, and we're going to get the really nice champagne for the going away party. And so I think that's another great example of good leadership and mentorship.
But you can do it with men as well. I think I think you have to let them know who you are. I think you have to let them know who you are. You know, if you're a mom and you need to do something at 3:00, if they know that you're going to be there, that you're a good, you're a good coworker, that you're going to get your work done and you'll do that A+, they also need to know who you are and what your time constraints are. And so I wouldn't be shy about talking about that. I also wouldn't be shy about raising your hand when you want something. I became the president of advertising.com because I walked into the CEO then at office at AOL and I said, I want that job. And he was like, what? And I was like, oh, I never thought that you actually wanted to be a CEO. And so you have to ask. And then he said, oh, it totally makes sense. But nobody had. So I think you do sometimes have to stick your neck out. And what's the worst thing? They can say no, right? It's a big deal. But I do think you have to ask. And also, don't let people get away with saying sort of things that are discriminatory or inappropriate. I'll tell you another AOL story because we're all in the digital world. We were at the beginning. So at one point at AOL, there were 2 of us that were women. There were, I think, 20 direct reports to the CEO, and he used to get the 2 of us confused all the time. Literally, like in big meetings. Her name was Lisa. My name is Lynda. She had red hair. I have brown hair. And he literally, and at one point we just walked up to him. We said, what do you do? Like, do we look the same to you? Like, you don't get the guys confused. And he never, after that, he got our names right all the time. I mean, we were terrified to go up to him, but I do think you have to call out inappropriate. I mean, that wasn't that inappropriate, but you have to call it inappropriate behavior.
Yeah. It's important to note that she was one of the only women in that room, though, talking to all men about it. And then she would tell us that she did it, and we would hear from other people, like, she starts the meeting saying, once again, everyone, it's 5:30, this is super inconvenient for me. So I do think, like, with a little chisel, she was chipping away at them every single time they convened to make her point, and it was a room full of men. But I understand, what your point is. Yeah, it's harder. Right, total, 100%.
There are great male. I mean, this should not be a session that's against men. There are great male bosses out there, and I think you can. I mean. Well, I don't know. I think I think there are a lot of great male leaders out there, but if you do happen to work with one who's a total asshole, then I would get out of that team. I mean, honestly, I would get out of that team.
I think add to your thought. Having been in a situation and then kind of learning, to your point, get out the team, I knew going into my next positions, what you're saying about what your former colleague did, that chip away, like you carve out your own territory through your narrative in all the next places you go. And that's, own it from the beginning. Like I took on my first C-suite position with a 6-month-old baby and breastfeeding. One of my first meetings was like, oh, we need you in Paris for an hour. So of course I walk into it's like, whew, okay, you all owe me some milk, honey, because mama is pumping and dumping things for the benefits. Let's get to it. With the chairman of our holding company. We had laughs, but from jump, we knew that I'm going to be very direct with you, even if it feels like it's joking. You'll know about my family. 2, I'll let you know that we're here for business. And 3, I'll let you know that I love to be here, but I have other responsibilities, and you'll get what you need to get done. But we won't waste time. So every conversation I had with anyone that would call you and say, come to Paris for an hour meeting, you would know that comes at a consequence. You see what I'm saying? So you can always chip away and carve out territory, and it may be push the button, as Lynda's saying, go someplace new. That's available to you.
Is that the pivot? Is that the pivot? Just go someplace new, or is it to stay and keep grinding it, trying to build the trust? What is the line? Where is the, I don't want to say the breaking point, but
So
oftentimes happens.
Yeah.
You made a great point. We're all trying to be perfect. We're all trying to deliver and show all this great work. But where is the line that you say, maybe I should cut and run, or maybe I should stay in it, or there's a layoff soon, or they're reorging. I mean, that's the real reality. That's the reality that I think a lot of us are in. That you would agree.
Yeah, I mean, I would say my personal hot take is that at the end of the day, we are all individually responsible for what it takes to maintain our mental health or our, I personally would never outsource that to an employer. I don't expect my manager to be more invested in me than I am. And I feel like it's kind of it's your call. It's at what point, yeah, it is tough, but it's when, I would say if you're not learning and you're not earning, one or the other, that's when you have to seriously consider. And then once you've hit the wall for you, then it's time.
And I do think companies need to create that culture of care, though, and that is something that is not happening. I'm going out on maternity leave in a couple of months. This is very top of mind for me. I'm part of a very small group of people who get paid family leave. It's 27% of U.S. workers get some kind of paid family leave. 1 in 4 women go back to work after 2 weeks having a baby. And if you have a C-section like I did, either way, you're in adult diapers, let's be honest, for a long time. And if our federal government is not going to do it, companies need to. They need to put benefits in place and policies. We have bereavement policy. I have a colleague who just lost his father who's taking all the time he needs. I have another colleague who's going through a mental health crisis, who's much younger. She's taking the time she needs. Companies do need to provide that culture of care. It's important. It's not just on us to advocate for ourselves, too.
I think having the community that we talked about around you to sort of talk about things that you're experiencing in the workplace is really important. That's what's really helped me along the way. Friends, mentors, people that you can talk to. When I joined AOL, and I keep bringing up AOL because it was the first digital media company, and it was just a complete boys' club. Actually, it was famous as a boys' club. It was outed as a boys' club. And I was one of the senior women leaders there, and I didn't know what to do. I had women reaching out to me with concerns. So we created an ombudsman program where women could come, or anyone could come and talk about issues that they were experiencing in the workplace in a safe place. It was very, very successful, and we could help them make those decisions. Should I leave? Should I bring a lawsuit? What should I do? And so if you can't do that in your company, I would suggest that. I've actually thought we should do that as an industry, to sort of create an ombudsman program across the industry where we could have leaders come together. I literally have people reach out to me sometimes on LinkedIn from the industry, telling me about some experiences they were having. Some women reached out to me from an agency group. It was heartbreaking what was happening to them, and they had nobody to talk to. So creating ombudsman programs like that is like super important. I mean, you're not powerless in a situation like this, and if you feel powerless, try to find someone to talk to. And if there's no one you could talk to in the company, then it might not be a place you want to stay, honestly.
Evangeline, can I offer just like a framework, just really quick? Rebecca said something, you're either earning or you're learning, right? You're typically earning, learning, or you're leveraging, meaning that you're at a place that has some cachet, or you have a title, you cash it in for something later at a time that makes sense, or you're doing a combination of any of those, or you're leaving. That's a congruent exchange with you and work. The other thing I consider for folks, I tell them, my thought is you work for you, Inc., and your board members and shareholders are the most important folks who are in your life, right? And so you're serving at the pleasure of those folks. So if you're making a you, Inc. level decision, are your most important stakeholders and shareholders being served in your decision? You are on that list too. So, not grinding yourself into the dust would probably be a qualifiable thing to consider. If that's, something you're experiencing, does that serve you, Inc., right? But beyond that, the framework, like once your Maslow's hierarchy is met, food, breathe, love, the ability to go into homeostasis, all that good stuff, most of us are in a place where we have some financial stability and all that good stuff. So there's another hierarchy that exists within why we are in our careers or in the places we're in. And that's like why we exist in places and how we show up our best and the things that like light us up would be the terms that we agree to work. Usually when you're experiencing friction, something is out of line with that, right? For me, my hierarchy is flexibility because I have 3 little kids. Financial stability, we have a number. I have marriage and a mortgage. We got things to pay for. On top of that is playing in the green space. I don't like to be bored. I like to do things that drive impact for others and even me. And on top of that is integrity. I like to work in places that have integrity. When I know something's wrong is one of those 4 things are out of line. So that's the framework I make the decision from because it's only yours. Only you uniquely can decide whether you're staying, going, or growing, or in any place. And I think it's a you, Inc. level decision. Okay?
Everyone should check out Ronnie's podcast, What Do You
Awesome.
Require?
Well
because
said.
I just listened to it, and that was, you summarized it, but there's more, so you should listen to that podcast.
Episode 2 of the Career Clinic podcast.
But do we have time for Q&A? Because we were going to do a Q&A, but I love that everyone's jumping in because I love the confidence and I love the risk-taking. But yes, please.
I have a question. I hope this is a fun one for everyone on the panel. So I told my partner what I was doing tonight, and he said, women are taking over the world. My immediate response is not in our industry. My immediate response was, oh, no, we're just catching up. And I was thinking, if you heard that from a man, right, women taking over the world, what would be your response? Because I'd love to have even like 4 or 5 better ones to go back. Because that is...
I would say men have been doing it for centuries.
Mine would just be good.
I know.
I would say women have already taken over the world. We just need to announce it and talk about it more and own it.
To come back to you. I'm training a GPT right now. Her name is Ellie Eveready. So I'll type it in my GPT and see what she says. I love clapbacks. We'll exchange emails. I'll give you a list of 20.
Yeah.
My question from before, talking about like it's a boys club, right? I work at an agency. So while agencies are dominant female, like VP, SVP, and EVP are male. So my question is, how do we change that? How do I get there? How do I join that club? Because is it the trust in relationships? Is it the pie? Because it's not just my agency, right? It's a lot of agencies, and it's a lot of places that we're seeing this.
I mean, figure out how to get promoted. Figure out what it would take to get. I would actually say if you've been there a while and if you feel that you're owing a promotion, just go up and say, what is it going to take to get me promoted? I'm interested in this role, and not be shy about that, even if you don't get the answer that you want. We need more women in the C-suite. I mean, I talked about the 10% of women who run Fortune 500 companies. We're not going to have a more equal world until we get more women up there, and it's all of you. I'm 62 years old. I'm almost done with my career. It's going to be all of you that are going to have to do that. And it is scary, but don't drop out. Don't drop out, and try to figure out how you can get there. I started the 98 because women founders in the U.S. get 2% of venture capital dollars, and that number has not changed for over 15 years, even though the pie has grown of venture capital. So why is that? And the reason is because most venture capital firms are run by men, and there is some sort of implicit bias where they are not allocating funds to women CEOs. And the number hasn't changed, and I think it's going to take women to fund women so we can get more women at the top in the C-suite. And if we can get all of you in the C-suite, we will change the power imbalance. So you shouldn't take from this session sort of let's be down about this, and you've been amazing about inspiring us. We want to inspire all of you. Just keep going, and to reach out to your networks, to your mentors when things don't go your way. It's not every day is a wonderful day, but it's not a reason to give up. And I'm not saying that you are, by the way. I'm just
and the data is there, just especially around female-founded companies. Companies that are run by women
outperform.
They earn twice the revenue per dollar invested. There are no issues there with performance at all. It's discrimination. It's systemic. And luckily, we have people like you who are changing that.
We're trying. I literally spoke about 6 months ago to one of the richest men in America. And I was asking him for money, and he said, I never invest in women. I said, why not? He said, because life gets in the way for them. That's literally what he said, direct quote, 2023. So this is what we need to change. And anyway. Sorry.
I read a Harvard Business Review article, always I'm locked in, about the types of questions that women investors get asked.
Yes.
And men get asked
about their
potential questions, and women get asked what can go wrong. And I think maybe a great way to reframe this is what if everything goes right? What if that's how we lead? When we ask for things, the job that I pitched, I just wrote a JD, put 30 minutes on his calendar, and I was like, I want this job. And then he was like, okay, and workshopped it. That might not have happened, but if you proceed with what could happen, I think that's at least a way to keep your mental health in check.
It's confidence, too.
Great.
I feel like just having that confidence to walk into the room and to say, I have a good idea, I have valuable ideas, I'm smart, I'm worth it. I mean, that's half the battle is the confidence. But you have to find that inner confidence, and that's sometimes very hard to do.
I think, too, for everybody within this room, especially those of us that work on the agency side, being able to recognize when we have an opportunity to choose a partner that's maybe women-owned, right? So I work at an agency that's heavily invested in DE&I initiatives. And when it gets to that finish line and talking to some teams, they're like, oh, I kind of work. I don't. But what if they did? What if they might? And that might not only change the life
And I'd like to do a plug and invitation. I don't know if you're all my agency folks, if you're not involved with She Runs It, who used to be the Advertising Women of New York, right? She Runs It, I feel like exemplifies reminding you that, oh no, we're in this and we've got this, and maybe in your agency it's not reflective of the possibilities of your career or our industry, but we're out there. You know, you don't have to throw a rock far and hit. We're not throwing rocks and hitting anybody, but all around us are the possibilities of brilliant leaders to follow, even if they're not in your right space, your direct space. And so I invite you to, you know, engage more deeply. For those who aren't engaged, come ask me about it. Just yesterday in Atlanta, we had Best of the Badass Bosses, where CMO of Delta and Home Depot and all these folks and all their agencies filled up a room, standing room only, just having the deepest transparent conversation about, here's what you need to do on the agency side, here's what we're doing on the brand side. We're all in this together. And I feel like exposure to that is exactly what you need throughout the arc of your career to remind you, okay?
Any other questions? We have time for one or two more.
Can you talk about reaching out to women that don't look like you, and kind of your experiences there? Because there's a great podcast called Sisterhood is Scarce, and it's quite old, but it really resonated with me, and it's very interesting to talk to scientists that, like, women scientists that study women and kind of how they interacted with each other in the workplace. And for a long time, there was the pie. The pie is only so big, and everyone gets a slice, and it never gets bigger. I'd love to kind of hear some of the good experiences and some of maybe the challenging ones that we have with each other, because sometimes it's like it's easy to always connect with people that look like you, even within the gender. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say, and that's why women don't get the venture capital that they need, because the men in the room say, this person doesn't, I can't relate to this person. And if the men do invest, I used to work at a company called I Fund Women, and we would hear from female founders who would say, a man said, oh, my wife would like that product, or, oh, my wife convinced me to like that product, so I'm going to invest in your company. Anyway, aside. I mean, I personally think spending time with only people who look like you and do the same things as you is super boring. I've been lucky to work at companies that prioritize diversity, that, you know, haven't fired their DE&I departments or DE&I leaders. And I think that is how I've grown as a person. And my friendships and business relationships are super diverse, and I'm really proud of that. So I don't really have any negative experiences to share, but I would say, if your company is not a place that values diversity and that is full of people that just look like you should probably think about that and evaluate if that's a place you want to be.
I think there's power in numbers and in community, and I feel like, at least I hope the days are gone when women felt like they were competing against each other for a female slot. I mean, I did see that, honestly, like 40 years ago, but I haven't seen that in a while. I don't know if you all have, but so that's why I do think it's important in your organizations, you know, to reach out, you know, to people, not necessarily people that look like you, but the people that share your values. I do think this is going to take a village. It's going to take everyone, and I still think, you know, everyone is lifting each other up. I'm sorry to sound like I'm preachy about it, but I do think it's important. You know, I was on a board of directors. I do a lot of public company board work, and boards of directors are very interesting. They're really, you know, pretty much all male bastions, in part because boards generally stay on for like 15 years, so they don't turn that often. And that's why it's been so hard to get women and people of color onto boards. Anyway, I was going through this board process where we were trying to pick a new CEO, and the men on the board actually wanted a male candidate, and it was a male candidate versus a female candidate, and the women were most supportive of the female candidate, and actually she was the better qualified, and the men were saying really biased things about the woman. And we called a timeout on the board, And we got together, the three of us women, and we said, do they even see what they're doing? Do they even see the way they're characterizing this woman? And so then we went back. We had built the trust with the other members of the board, and we said to them, we just want to actually repeat back what you said about these two candidates, the man versus the woman. And they didn't even realize it. They didn't even realize their own biases. And actually, they were really appreciative after we told them. They had trusted us. We had built up the relationship, and then we called for a vote, and we elected the woman in as the CEO. So but the reason I'm telling you the story is there's power in groups of us. You have to build the trust. And it wasn't like they weren't even aware of what they were doing. They weren't even aware of what they were doing.
I think that's a good point. I like to share that I'm Black. First and foremost, Black 365 days a year and on leap years and all that. So I want to clarify if there are any questions. And with that, I've entered in the ad industry as a Black person in an industry for years and decades where we've struggled to get from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 10% of people of color and release the numbers and don't. On paper, that's even challenging, but the lived experience of that and being into a space where you're thinking of contorting and conforming so that you can fit in and be successful does carry with you along the arc of your career first until you reckon with the fact that that's a thing you personally have to sort with and determine how much you want to show up for that. And then second, realizing that your career is going to look like interacting with every single possible person that can be delightful and additive in any single way, whether it's a parent or, Black woman, not Black woman, anyone. They're there to add to the delight of your career, and everyone has something to offer. It took me a while to get there because I was so focused on I'm Black. Shoot, I gotta, ooh, Lord, how are we doing our hair today? No one looks like me. It's a very real thing. And so I share that because I think there's the self-inner work part of understanding how I'm unapologetically Black 365 days a year is how I decide to move through my career, meaning that you all see me on my flyer. That's how I typically have my hair. I'm very direct in how I show up for folks. I'm very honest and transparent. I don't diminish that, but also a part of that allows other people to come to me and connect and feel equally vulnerable. Most of the people in this room are not Black. Hello. And even me saying I'm Black for some people, oh, okay, damn, we're going here. But that opens up conversation because we all have mutual connections. And so I share with you, that's been the good and bad experience for me is that inner work and personal kind of work, but also taking every opportunity to shift the room a little bit to say, yeah, we can talk about this because it's my lived experience and we can still connect and find common ground, but do know that I am very aware that I am Black and I might be one of the few, insert any number of things in the room, parent, Black woman, any number of things, and that has a very real effect on how any of us show up. And so for the folks who may not be in my shoes or I'm not in your shoes, I think empathy is the thread I think we can all carry with us that makes us better leaders and makes us better partners, colleagues, and friends because we all have a differentiated lived experience, but as a person of color in our respective industries, it's very highlighted, especially in the today of things when we're struggling to move numbers over 20 and 30 years that really haven't gone anywhere, to be honest, significantly. All right. I'll step off my little soapbox.
No, I love it. Any other questions? We have one more, maybe. Yeah.
We've talked a lot about mentorship, but what about being a sponsor for the rest of the people? Speaking to people who are not in the room at that moment. I feel that's more necessary sometimes for women. And, as a like, say, if you know someone who's good for a role or someone who's good for work, talk about them, give them the exposure that they need. How important do you think that is versus
I would say I have people in my professional career who I would consider more like sponsors than mentors. They might be people who I work with and I have worked for and no longer work for. And when I'm not in the room, they will think about me for opportunities, but we don't necessarily have a active current working relationship. And I still think that those are important to maintain. And I would say that in some ways, like you mentioned before, Ronnie, it's kind of like networking, mentorship, and then sponsorship. So thinking about like ways that you can get the exposure or the influence so that people know that you're doing that good work so you can be thought of when you're not in the room, potentially.
All right, I think we're out of time. I'm getting the looks from Lisa, so we're out of time. But thank you guys so much for participating. This was an amazing conversation.
Great question.
Let's eat.